Hey guys, so today we are answering a subscriber question, and the question in question was, Fredrik, how do I convince my company to change tooling? So let's get into it. Well, the person who sent this question had a little bit of a description to give me some context of the problem that he was facing, and basically what he was trying to explain to me was that at his current company he had an issue with that he had been shut down in a few code reviews where he had started using the object spread in JavaScript, and there were quite a few people who had complained in these code reviews, like his coworkers had said that it was not something they wanted him to use because it makes the code extra complicated and it makes it less readable, and it's not, well, basically the idea was that it was not comprehensible to use this. And then he was kind of confused about this because then at another time he had submitted a code review, and in this specific one he had combined the usage of promise chaining with the .then function basically with using async await. Or he had used only promise chaining and not async await, I'm not really sure. And that had also come back to him in a code review where a more senior coworker had come in and kind of told him off and said that, you know, you should always use async await in this scenario. So his question is basically, how do I get these sorts of things? You know, how can I prove to my coworkers that this is the sort of thing that, you know, that I have a point, if you will, because he's trying to push towards using something like Redux in their stack, which they're apparently not using. Now, the reason why this context is fairly important is because the way that I can describe this sort of problem is that in my world, there's two sorts of issues that he's touching on here. So one part is the actual, which was the bulk of this description, is that, okay, you have issues using certain practices that you want to use when you actually write software. That's not necessarily adopting something new. I mean, using object.spread is not necessarily like the same sort of thing as trying to get people to adopt Redux. So it's a two-parter in this scenario. But basically what I told them is that the only thing that you can do when it comes to conveying or basically getting people to get on board with the tool is going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of effort, and before I give you the answer, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself one of the hardest questions that anybody who wants to improve on something needs to ask before they get started. And that is basically the same sort of problem a business person has to face when they go into a sales meeting. You need to ask yourself, what is the value of the thing that I am doing? Because remember, let's take the object spread problem as an example. That is a trivial, a syntactic sugar thing. It has almost no practical value whichever you pick. So if you're tribal leader, which usually you have a few of those in the company who will say that, no, we should do it this way or that way. It's the same discussion as double quotes guys versus single quotes. There is no right answer. So whoever is in control or the most perceived to be the highest valued person with an opinion on this topic will be the thing, that will be the practice that you go with. Because software is, as I like to call it, a expert democracy. An expert democracy is where everybody has a voice, but the person whose voice usually carries the heaviest weight is the person who is perceived to have the highest amount of value within the company. And if you have an opinionated person in your company with a bit of influence, whatever they say will happen. You can fight them on this, but unless they want to allow your opinions and thoughts to actually get through, you're not going to get anywhere, and that's unfortunately a part of life. So the best mindset you can have for that sort of scenario is to basically make an informed argument or accept the fact that you can't use object spreads for some reason. I'm sorry, it's not a logical thing. It's a completely illogical thing, but it's the exact same problem as double quotes versus single quotes. Some people feel strongly about this, and if you are such a person, I'm sorry, there is not much you can do about it. It's a battle that you go and verify on almost every single programming form somewhere. In the case of promises, you see, like to strictly adhere to promises, that's also a very good example of a situation where it's a very tribal thing as well. Should you use async await or promise chaining? Now, the thing that is nice about this specific thing is that you can actually arm yourself with a use case where async await will not work, where you basically have a situation where you need to use promise chaining. That is absolutely possible. But what I told the subscriber was that even if you go through the work of basically figuring out a use case for when using the promise chaining versus using async await is a good idea, at best what's going to happen is that you're going to get your coworkers to basically admit that, oh yeah, in this scenario promise chaining is probably the way to go. And then they're just going to turn around and still tell you that, yeah, but most of the time you should still use async await, because it's not a logical thing. They have decided themselves that async await is the way to do it, and they prefer consistency or that way of doing it if they ever get the choice. Once again, it's not a logical thing. It's just their mental attachment to a certain practice. And there's nothing, it's not logical, so you can't fight it, I'm sorry to say. But what you can fight, or what you can do, is the thing that he was talking about. Like, if you want to get something like Redux into the stack, you basically have to make a business case. You need to go the route of convincing people in the same way a business person would convince somebody else. And that is to, first and foremost, really ask yourself, is this thing, like is Redux as an example, is this a really good investment? Will this make or break our project, or will there be a significant measurable value in getting this into the stack? Because unless you can prove that, you will not get it through. It's not going to be good enough to come in and say, I think we should use this, because unless people are already on board with it, you're going to have to make a sell. You're going to have to push it like a salesperson. So really asking that and starting by identifying issues and pain points within your current workflow that can be credited to you not using this tool is the first step. In other words, you need to find concrete examples of when this, in this case, say Redux, is a really good idea. Because the migration cost is a cost that you're going to have to pay here. When you have armed yourself with enough information and examples from your own workflow that can be used as leverage in an argument or a presentation of some sort, then you're going to have to basically present the case to the others in your company and say that we have these issues here, and I mean, if we use this library, it would solve a lot of these issues. What's then going to happen basically is that the naysayers, and there's going to be a few categories of people. Some people will be on board, some people will be indifferent. Those people are you don't have to care so much about. The indifferent people are going to be the vast majority of people, and these people will go with whatever the person with the highest, like the expert they will go with what the expert democracy decides on. The naysayers will have criticisms and have questions that they are going to pose in order for you to kind of dissuade people from this way of working or from your suggestion. So you're going to have to get in front of them in this scenario. You're going to have to basically figure out what the possible criticisms and questions that they are going to have is going to be, so that you feel that you have an answer to these questions. The thing that you're going for is basically just to have an answer to all of these questions and present these pain points and their solution in the format of this tool. And then you simply have to make the sell. Can we just try it? Because if you can get them to try it, then you've won the battle. Because if they go with, they're never going to do it for you. That's already, you're not going to get them to just, hey, we're going to do it. It's a persuasion piece, basically. So if they can get you to get to a point where they admit that there might be some value here and they are willing to try it, then you need to take ownership for the migration, and most important of all, your job from that point on is not just to actually do the migration. It is your job to do that in the least painful way possible. Because remember, you are trying to convince people who are a little bit reluctant to do something to change something. And if that change is perceived as being something that causes them pain, they're going to give you hell for it. They're going to complain about it, and you're going to be up shit creek, basically. So make sure that you actually have a plan for how to do this migration in a sustainable way, and how to do it without relying on that other people actually help you out. It's a very, and as you can hear, what I'm saying here is basically a lot of work. It is a lot of work. So really ask yourself whether or not it's worth it to you to do this, because even if you make the sell and they still shut you down, then the only thing you can do is basically to re-emerge this question every time you have an issue that can be related to your suggestion. So that finally maybe they admit that, oh yeah, you basically sit and wait until the pain for them gets to a point where they just say, maybe we should try that idea anyway. And if you never get to that point, you just have to quit the company. That is the unfortunate situation. So I would highly recommend you to really think about whether or not it's worth it to you. So what I want you to take away from this is basically that if you face people who are opposed to changing practices like the single quotes, double quotes, promises versus async await, and these sorts of things, there's very little you can do about that. That is completely illogical. It's an emotional thing, and you can't fight emotion like that. There's no way, because there's no benefit there's very little benefit for quite a lot of people to actually to change their behavior if they're set in their ways. When it comes to adopting tooling, you really have to ask yourself if the migration is worth it in the first place. Because remember, if you invest in, say, Redux, and something else comes along that makes Redux a bad idea, then you've invested in a tool that is now just going to be a legacy for you. So really make sure that the migration is going to be worth it. And if you decide that, hey, it is worth it, it's objectively a good thing for us to do this and it will solve a lot of problems, you have to make the sell. You have to arm yourself with examples and pain points, things that people can actually touch, or rather than can comprehend. Tell them that this tool will help us solve these problems, and if you just give me some time, I will make the migration. Make sure that you have answers to their questions, and then take ownership of doing the migration in the least painful way possible for your coworkers. That is, in my world, the only sustainable way to promote change within an organization where there is a bit of reluctancy. That's at least how I've found things to turn out when I've done this sort of thing. Have a great day.